when I was investing at Techstars, it was very founder driven and really focused on the founder and their specific insight. And now we at M13 are taking a more thesis driven approach. So thinking about in the markets where we invest, commerce, health, work, and money, what are the tailwinds or changes in the market that are creating new opportunities? So the obvious example today is AI. And, not just that AI has emerged, we've had AI for a long time,
right?
But the rapid deployment of AI in a lot of different settings, both enterprise and consumer, is creating new tailwinds, is generating new market opportunities that then we can invest against. I'm thinking as an investor much more from a thesis perspective than I did when I was making earlier stage bets.
All right.
Great, nice wheels.
Thanks for joining me. Start from the top. Tell me about M13.
I'm an investing partner at M13. I've been there about 3.5 years, since 2020, and we are a Series A fund focused on investing in the future of commerce, work, health, and money. Fairly broad investment focus. Pretty big team. One thing that's different about us is we have 3 operators for every investor. So we really believe in an expanded platform model and in our ability to help our companies after we make the investment. We're distributed across the country. We've got an office in LA, an office in New York, and then people in San Francisco and also in Miami.
Now M13 comes from space stars that are...
So glad to hear you say that, and not is it affiliated with Microsoft. M13 is named for Messier 13, which is one of the brightest clusters of stars in the northern sky.
Right.
And so our philosophy is we might be made up of a bunch of bright individuals, but together we are brighter as a group. And so our hashtag is brighter together, and we focus on what can we create that's greater than the sum of its parts.
That's awesome. Really aligned with my ethos and what collective genius means.
Collective genius, very similar to M13.
Yeah, that's exactly what the ethos is. It's our thing has always been empower change together.
And I mean, I know firsthand, what impact you've had on founders, because you've worked with some companies that I've invested in, to great effect. I got interested in the firm when I first met them and joined 4 years ago, just because of the really broad and diverse background of the people who are the partners there. Everyone is a former operator. Everyone has an interesting backstory about what they did as a founder and operator. And that's a really interesting place to be, where there's just a lot of diversity of thought and different experiences. And we've worked together to build a platform about how we share that knowledge for the benefit of the portfolio companies. It's been very fun and rewarding to be part of building that, to work with this incredible group of people, and then to feel like we're really creating new ways of engaging as a VC, and having an impact.
Well, the operator thing I think is so important, and I sound like a broken record, all the stuff that I talk about, but it's all about ops. It's all about organization, and I think a lot of people miss that when they think of early stage companies. They think it's supposed to be chaotic and crazy, and you may be drinking from the fire hose of learning, but it doesn't need to be chaotic, and it shouldn't be chaotic. I think the best teams are the most organized teams.
There is this resistance sometimes in early companies around creating process.
Right.
And this feeling that what I did when it was just me in my garage is going to still work when it's 5 people. And the fact is, you constantly have to design new process that is appropriate to the size of the organization.
Yeah.
So it's not zero process, even from the minute that you have 2 people.
Right.
You have to have some ways of making decisions, some, points of interaction. And so you're constantly revisiting and reinventing that operating model as the company scales. I think the other thing that's interesting, and one thing that we've found, is not that we have better insight than our founders, but because we are in a position as an outsider to take a step back and look critically at process end to end, or how they're doing their business, we can sometimes come up with insights that they might not see because they're running 1,000 miles an hour.
Right.
So we do this process called labs. We've created a way of doing a sort of quick start evaluation on a different functional area. So product labs, sales labs, talent labs.
Right.
And then coming in and bringing that insight. Our sales lab kind of looks like a secret shopper program. And it's incredible what you can learn just getting that different vantage point on your process. And,
right.
Some of the things might be small and tactical, others might be big and strategic, but always something interesting comes out of those processes.
I think it's interesting that I believe everybody has a process on how they work. So even if you're a solo founder on day one with your idea, what you do that day, you're going to go through a process of doing things and learning things. And I think it's just like this learning loop. We learn, figure out what works. We put more bets on what works. We put some bets on trying to figure out what other things might work. And as you scale, it's the same thing, but now you're dealing with more people. Now you have 6 people. Then next you have functional areas where there's multiple people in it, but it's communicating to all those areas and that learning loop to continue to happen. Communicate, iterate, execute, communicate, iterate, execute.
For sure.
And I think that can get real lost. So people that don't believe in process, they themselves have a process from day one. It's just we need to communicate a process when there's more people so we can be effective and efficient, I think.
So the point you're making, I think, is that if you say you don't like process or you don't have a process, you do have a process. You're just not identifying what it is.
Exactly.
Right. So
Yeah.
There's always a process. There's always a preferred way of working. It just might not be explicit. That kind of dovetails with what I think is really important as an entrepreneur, which is to have a real penchant for learning and an ability to learn quickly. Which part of it is just understanding what you've learned,
Right.
and then like leaning into the things that are working, like you said. So do more of what's working. It's kind of one of my core principles. It's like figure out what's working and do more of that. It
Right.
sounds so simple, and then to continue to test and learn and try new things, but in an experimental way without throwing away the core of things you're already doing that's working. And it's tough to know what's working. How do I have enough evidence something's working?
Yes.
And that's another area that that I love to help founders think through is like, what's enough evidence for me to say, this is working, I'm going to lean into this thing over here.
Yeah. I find a lot of teams get stuck there. They're like, well, we can't make a decision yet. And so then I say, well, the question is, what do we need to find out to make a decision? That's where you need to put your energy right now, is to go. It's kind of like if you're going through like the wilderness and you didn't know which direction to go and you had a few people, it's like, send a couple scouts out a couple different ways and come back with some information so we can make a decision. I think a lot of teams get stuck, not only in the early stage, but even larger teams in the like Series C, D stages within teams get stuck and they just pause.
Right.
They don't know how to make a decision, so they just wait or they don't talk about it.
They don't know what evidence they need in order to drive a correct decision. So it's almost like measure twice, cut once. You have to spend more time designing those experiments or figuring out what it is that I'm looking for. What is the data that's going to tell us it's working? And like, there's a fascinating thing right now, which is there's this wealth of data. We have so much data at our fingertips, but if you don't understand what questions to ask the data, it's not actually going to help you having all that data, right?
That's so true. That's so true. So I want to back up a little bit. There's a story about you that I didn't know and I found out. When you founded the company Scribble Press.
Yes.
Tell me how you met that co-founder.
Yes. So this is a funny story. I was at the time, I was a talent manager. So I had a business managing writers and directors in Hollywood. I was also a mom with young kids. I had 2 stepdaughters. I had a 2-year-old, and I was 7 months pregnant with my second son. My 4th kid overall.
That's what I always call perfect timing.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, doesn't that seem like an amazing time to start a company?
Yeah, exactly.
I think so. So we were on a cross-country flight going to the East Coast, and I had snagged myself a seat in business class because of being 7 months pregnant. My husband and 3 kids were in the back.
Where they belong.
I mean, we sprung for one business class seat. I got it. The perks of being pregnant. And I normally don't talk to people on planes. I am very much about, just open your book, open your computer, do your own thing. You can get stuck in a long conversation. Very risky, especially on a cross-country flight. But this time I decided to talk to the woman next to me because she was wearing a t-shirt that said Mrs. Darcy. Now, that was a reference to the book Pride and Prejudice, which happens to be my favorite book.
Okay.
So in this case, I decided to make an exception to my rule, and I talked to her. And we had an incredible conversation on this plane. And during our conversation, we found out how much we had in common, including we had both gone to Yale. We were both moms in LA. We had very similar kind of entrepreneurial instincts. And she pitched me this idea for a company. She heard about my background and how I'd grown up with a literary agent mom and a book editor dad. And she turned to me and said, I have this business idea and you'd be the perfect person to do it with me. And she pitched me the idea of doing Build-A-Bear for books, which was basically a retail location where kids would come in and make their own books. And I had this experience of, it was like I got goosebumps. And I had this feeling of certainty that this was what I was meant to do.
Oh, wow.
And that it was a fait accompli. By the time I got off that plane, we had decided to start this company together as business partners. So imagine me exiting the plane, reuniting with my husband and my 3 small kids.
That's what I was picturing right away.
And I go up to him and I say, guess what? I met this woman on this airplane and we're going to start a company together. And he looks at my stomach, looks at our 3 kids, and he said, do you think this is a good time to do a startup? And I said, yes. And he said, okay. And, we had a great adventure with that business, and she's still a good friend and learned a ton, created something that people really loved and resonated with. And we could never get the business model quite right. We just couldn't get the unit economics to work. Those retail entertainment concepts are pretty tough, but
Right.
Lots of amazing learnings there. And it was an incredible journey. And I talk to people on planes now. So
That's so funny because I don't. Because I always think like, what if I get into this and I can't get my way out of it,
So I kind of learned to be open to the magic of the universe. And that wasn't the only time in my life something amazing happened to me on a trip. I met my best friend when I was 19 at a bar in St. Lucia because I thought she had a cool necklace on. And
Oh my gosh.
she's a modern dancer. She's not someone I ever would have met other than that
That's so
situation. So I'm a big fan of serendipity.
I had a similar experience with Collective Genius when I started it. A child on the way, one already. We were selling a house. We were already building a house, but we hadn't sold the other house yet. I said to my wife, I'm like, I want to start this company to help, CEOs, founders, investors make better companies. And she's like, tell me more about that. And I'm like, I can't really. I haven't really figured that part out yet. She's like, I think you should do it. And
Wow.
yeah. And I was like, really? I was expecting her to say no. And I did it. And yeah, so since 2005, I've been doing this.
That's amazing. And here you are. And I think it's 5 kids. Is that right?
5 kids.
5 kids.
1 stepson.
5 kids,
Yeah.
1 stepson, and a startup that is still going strong.
Yeah,
So
and
that's a great story.
every one of those kids feels like a startup too, right?
Sure, of course. And you learn something different with each one.
So I want to talk about Techstars because,
Yeah.
well, for you with Techstars, you had so many good companies, and I don't know if it was the recruiting process, the process that you did with them, but you had some amazing ones in that group. You had, but Fly by Jing was one
Yep.
of them, right?
Furnish, Provida, Blackstock and Weber.
Oh yeah, I love Blackstock.
Yeah. When I went into Techstars, to establishing Techstars in Los Angeles, I was really focused on investing locally. I saw having Techstars presence there. I wanted to build a community around it. So a lot of these Techstars programs, people fly in, they have a 3-month experience, and then they leave. And so my vision was, let's build a cadre of founders that are going to stay connected and then stay connected to the program, and just build a whole community around it of people that can be helpful to each other. And to a large extent, that has happened because I made so many investments locally in those early years. Those founders are now kind of the core of the Techstars community. So that was really the theme. And because the founders were all local, I really got to know them during the application process because we would be able to meet in person multiple times.
Right.
So, the investing, I was really new to investing at that point. I'd done a little angel investing, but I was what I would call an intuitive investor. And I was responding to what we would now call founder market fit, and an interesting perspective and people who have an earned secret about the world based on their background, right? And have an interesting insight. So Jing Gao, as an example of that, right, really had a very specific and clear vision about the kind of company she wanted to build and the role she felt her company could play in cuisine in America, right? And that's a compelling vision. And it's not something you might say, oh, this is a classic venture scale business. At the time, she had 3 products, and the core product was this Szechuan chili crisp, but there was something about her and the way she approached that company and her vision.
Right.
And I could say the same thing for Melanie Strickland and Slingshot Aerospace. When I met Melanie, she was still a major in the U.S. Army. She was about to retire. Didn't have an iota of entrepreneurial experience, but she had a lot of passion for what she saw as the future of space technology.
Right.
In a way that I just found really compelling. Give zero credit to kind of the program and creating those companies. I was really just intuitively responding to people who I felt would be very powerful founders.
What was the biggest lesson learned for you from Techstars?
I think one of the lessons I learned was listen to your gut. There were a few times when I overlooked concerns about the team because I was so excited about the market or the traction.
Right.
That's never a good idea, right? Everything comes back to the team. And so even though now as a Series A investor, we're looking for a much more complex and complete package of an amazing team with an incredible market opportunity, a unique and differentiated strategy, kind of all those things have to be present. The core is the team, and if the team isn't the right team for that idea, or there's some issue around how they're approaching it, or, then that's always gonna kind of take the company in spite of everything else kind of being in place. Another thing I learned that's kind of interesting is don't ever impose your own vision of what the company could be on the founders. You have to really listen to what is the company those founders are telling you they want to build. Because I would often say, I could see what this could be, and I've got my own idea. But if that's not an idea that they're embracing, it's never going to happen, because it's just not the company that they want to build.
It has to come from
them. So anytime I find myself reaching over and going, what about this? Why don't we do that? I'm sort of driving the strategy too much and taking the company off in a different direction that the founders have not embraced. That never works out.
I think it's really interesting, because I think that's the role of the coach. I coach a lot of wrestling and jiu-jitsu. I've coached a lot of sports. The role of a coach is never telling someone what they must have to do, but to, help them become something bigger and better than they can be.
And I think that trap of imposing your own ideas on the companies you invest in is something that former founders and operators are particularly prone to.
Yeah.
Because we're always going, what would I do in their shoes? And how would I do it differently?
Now, you probably didn't experience this with Techstars in LA, but I've worked with a lot of Techstars programs, specifically the ones that are funded by large corporations. And so when they do Metro Madness or whatever they rebranded that as, when someone comes in from a retail, let's say a large retail company, and they've never been a startup founder, they rely on their knowledge and imposing their will on people. It does not work well with founders.
That's right.
I've been part of a group called Entrepreneurs Organization for over a decade. We have a rule called Gestalt. You can never tell anybody in your group or anybody in the organization what they should do. You can only talk about relevant experience. So you can say, I've been there and this is what I did and this is what happened, but you can never tell anyone what to do. And I think that rule works so well, especially with entrepreneurs. So we don't want someone to tell us what to do. We might want to we're curious about what people have done and what may have worked so we can make a decision. But I think something about founders, that just doesn't work well.
And that's another thing I look for in a founder is how do you incorporate outside advice? So there's a happy medium here where I think the best founders listen deeply, take it all in, and then make their own decision about whether they're going to incorporate what they've heard. Right. So on the one hand, you can get these founders who they're a little flip-floppy, and it's kind of like the last thing I heard is what I'm going to do.
Right.
They're very susceptible to outside ideas, which isn't great, because the minute something stops working, you're going to shift on a dime. You can't run a company that way. And then there are other founders who just, have blinders on and don't want to hear it, and it's their way. And so there is this kind of strong opinions loosely held way of working where you have to have a strong point of view, but also be willing to change it if you get new and different information, data, advice. You've got to be able to incorporate that. And there's certain founders that do that so skillfully, and it's a superpower.
Learning is a mechanism you need to build within the organization, not only within yourself, but within the organization. And I think
for sure,
that's why I feel like you have to have a cadence where you come back together and discuss what you've learned, what's working, what's not working. And that's why I really teach at the early stage, seed A, B stage. That's every 90 days with every team, especially the leadership team should be coming together. What's working, what's not working. Let's discuss, or what I call triage, issues and items. And then let's make a path forward. So you're always still making a path forward from those learnings. And then having a weekly meeting where we're going over the things that we decided that we were going to do and discuss those things and make sure those things are on course or on track.
And part of that learning process is having a culture where it's okay to say, this didn't work, we made a mistake here.
Right. You have to have a culture to be okay with failing.
Right.
Or we made the wrong mistake.
Right.
And
right.
It's so important. Like, that is so important. There's so many teams. I just got off a call with a team that I just onboarded on peak from over the holiday. We're going to make some bets, or you're going to make some bets. I'm not deciding what they are. Some are going to work and some are not going to work. But if they don't work, let's talk about them. And I think that's part of that learning cadence that has to happen every 90 days in that weekly meeting. And oftentimes, it's not someone's fault, because you're doing something that's never been done before. So you're just going to be a lot of things that don't work. But to be honest about that, it's like in sports. If you drop the football on the field, everybody sees it. But sometimes in business, people like to hide those things because they don't want to look at the fault. And I think it's just, you have to have an environment and a culture, and I think that's what you were saying.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you're robbing yourself and your organization of those learning moments if you don't look at failure and evaluate it and like get all the value of what's the learning there from it, right? And we really practice that inside M13 because we're constantly experimenting. We're constantly making investments, and anyone who understands venture capital knows that most of your investments are not going to work out.
Right.
So if you're not looking at the things that ultimately are not successful and seeing what is there to learn here and unpacking them, then you're just missing a big opportunity. The more you create a culture where that's okay, the freer people get to discuss things, the more you encourage learning across the organization, and ironically, the fewer mistakes you're going to make in the future because you've captured all that. So you're actually strengthening the organization when you lean into failure.
I want to talk a little bit more about M13 and the operational model. Some venture firms just invest, and they're clear about that. They don't do a lot of support. It may sit on the boards. Others have platforms, and M13 has a unique model where you have a lot of operators supporting these founders and their teams. What's that look like?
One interesting thing about the way we operate is we engage across every partner with every portfolio company. So I might have led the investment, but my partners have deep and independent relationships with our portfolio companies of their own.
Okay.
So I think that's important because the level of partners that we have, they and the experience they have would be wasted if we looked at that as a service organization, all running through the investing team. So we really operate as a team when we think about how to support the portfolio companies, what that looks like, who's going to do what, and then sharing insights and what we're learning about them, because that just helps us serve them better. So we almost run it like a little consulting firm where we have weekly meetings where we review the portfolio and who's doing what, and talk about issues at the highest strategic level. And we continue to get better at that and iterate on the model of how we interact. We've got a lot of great examples of case studies are from around our portfolio of like impact, and a lot of the newer experiments we're doing in particular are just have really been effective. I just love getting to work with all these smart people who all have their own entrepreneurial stories and journeys, right? I'm learning from my partners all the time, and from the CEOs that I get to work with.
What's one of those lessons learned, or something that maybe you have a different viewpoint on now that you've been at M13 for a while, that maybe you came in and you had a different perspective before?
I worked previously with very early companies. The teams were very small.
Right.
And I have really learned to appreciate organizational design and the ability to hire great senior talent as just an absolute success factor. My partner, Matt Hoffman, was chief people officer at DigitalOcean, serial chief people officer, leads our talent function, and has just done really incredible things with his entire talent team, but also working directly with our portfolio companies and helping them design effective organizations and then put the right people in them. And that wasn't just something a place where I'd spent a lot of time working with super early stage companies before. A lot of our companies are scaling. They're growing from 20 people to 40. They're going from 30 people to 60.
Yeah.
And being able to do that well is a core success factor.
Yeah. That was early days of a Collective Genius. It was, for us, was really talent mapping as people raised a A, a B, a C, a D, and then helping them put those right senior leaders in. And it's typically someone that's already done A to B or B to C, or, you know. And what we found, what was interesting, where the operating model for us came from, is that we'd help these companies put these right people in. It really felt like the right people, but something still wasn't working. Even though we had the right people, like this, the best person in the market, what wasn't happening. What we started realizing is if you build a leadership team, it's kind of like getting 5 different pieces of software. They have so much experience that's worked, and they're very definite, like, this is how I did it in the past and why it worked. So they all have different operating models. And so as the CEO, a smart CEO, you bring in people that know it better than you, and then you want to empower their system and how they work. But when you have 5 different people working in 5 different ways, it's hard to put that together. So it looks like duct taping APIs together of these software things to make it work together. And that's where we came across, like, wow, there's something missing here. We have the right people in these companies, but they're having problems, communication problems, goal setting problems, execution problems. And it was like, we need one operating system to drop in here that they all agree upon. That's how we're going to work.
Sure, they all have a different mental model of how the organization is supposed to function, right? And that could be a disadvantage of having people who have a lot of experience, is that they're more locked into their way of thinking.
Yes.
About how it's supposed to be.
And what they've seen in the past, what worked, is hard to say, like, I want to do something different.
Yeah.
But you have typically a leadership team of 5 to 8 people that all have that viewpoint, their own viewpoint.
I think all those problems are very solvable if you expose all that and you kind of get it out, but you've got to have the right conversations and ask the right questions in order to uncover that.
How would you say that your investment thesis has changed since joining M13?
I think when I was investing at Techstars, it was very founder driven and really focused on the founder and their specific insight. And now we at M13 are taking a more thesis driven approach. So thinking about, in the markets where we invest, commerce, health, work, and money, what are the tailwinds or changes in the market that are creating new opportunities? So the obvious example today is AI. And, not just that AI has emerged, we've had AI for a long time, but the rapid deployment of AI in a lot of different settings, both enterprise and consumer, is creating new tailwinds, is generating new market opportunities that then we can invest against. I'm thinking as an investor much more from a thesis perspective than I did when I was making earlier stage bets. And then, so therefore, looking for that thesis about why is there a new market opportunity here, combined with the right team to build against that opportunity.
Really gives them that superpower. You can have a great team and founder and vision, but it doesn't have the tailwinds. It's so much more difficult.
Technology for small businesses. This is an area that typically VCs haven't loved because it's very hard to sell to small businesses. It's hard to find them. They are incredibly diverse as a customer base, but with the development of AI workflows, it's become possible to create so much value for a small SMB or prosumer that you can build a really profitable business very quickly, building a technology that looks like a business in a box. So what is everything I need to operate my lawn care business? What is everything I need to operate as an independent bankruptcy attorney? There's a host of opportunities like that, and I'm excited to invest in that category because of this technology tailwinds that now makes it a really exciting place for venture capital.
Being at M13 and with your Techstars experience, you've observed a lot of boards and are on a lot of boards. What do you think makes a great board?
I think the core thing about a great board is high level of trust both ways. So trust of the CEO and the management team of the board, and trust of the board, implicit trust on the part of the board that the management team is fundamentally making good decisions and kind of everyone's interests are aligned, right? That's a sort of baseline requirement, and that's the table stakes. Then after that, how do you build a really effective board? You design a board meeting structure that isn't just a report out. We can get a update on the company's financial performance. What is the board really there for? The board should be there for, ideally, helping you think through the toughest strategic challenges of the company, in good times when you're really trying to make strategic moves, and then in moments of crisis to help you make the best decisions on behalf of all the company's shareholders, right? And you only get to that if you have a high degree of trust. Right. And then you have a board that's really engaged. There are board members that are on a lot of boards, and they kind of duck in and out. They show up for the board meeting, they're focused for those 2 hours, and they're not that engaged in the in-between times. I really think the best boards are ones where there's also a lot of conversation in between the official board meetings, and the board members are actively engaged in understanding what's happening with the company and contributing their best ideas in the interim.
How many topics do you think are a good number of topics for a board meeting?
I think the best structured board meetings have a certain specific set of sections about, reporting that's repeated, every time, that's very short. And then, 1 or 2 deep dive topics per board meeting, because you just can't make, these board meetings are 2 hours. You can't make a lot of progress on more than 2 issues if you're really gonna have everyone be heard and kind of get into a deeper strategic discussion.
Boards that I have been on and that I appreciate is when a CEO comes in and knows specifically these 2 or 3 things that they want to talk about, and they've already talked about it maybe one-on-one with a couple team members or even their leadership team, if they're on the right cadence. So they should have already been discussed, and hopefully they have some solutions or ideas. And it should hopefully coincide with that board meeting when they come in, and that they're organized with that. Some other ones I've come into where they kind of open up just a brainstorming session, and that seems to go really wrong.
I think that the investors who've been operators may do better in those situations because they're more comfortable with it. There's a sort of flavor of investor board member that's just all about financial performance and pushing for faster growth.
Right.
Which is, of course, we all want faster growth, but being the pressure point for faster growth isn't particularly useful to the CEO. Right? It's the next level question of how are we going to drive faster growth, and what are we going to sacrifice in order to do that? Right? So I think the CEO has to get really clear about, what do I want from this board? How can I get this board to work for me? Instead of thinking about it like how I can perform well so that the board thinks I'm doing a good job. You've got to flip that script completely and think about this board as in service of your company. How are you going to make the most out of that 2 hours?
Right. And that's what they're there for.
I consider myself I'm there to serve the company in that capacity, to serve the shareholders. Right. That is literally what a board member is, right? A representative of the shareholders. And so how can I show up prepared, ready to engage with ideas, having absorbed the material, having honestly called on all my partners, for their input and ideas before that meeting as well, so I can bring all that into the meeting.
With limited venture capital in the market, how would you advise a CEO, or how should they operate differently in this environment?
There's an interesting conversation that's been happening, for over a year now about how to balance growth and profitability. And I think that we swung the pendulum a bit far on the side of profitability at the expense of growth, and now that is normalizing. Founders need to thread that needle towards reasonable growth. No one expects a Series A company, even a Series B company, to be profitable, right? That's unreasonable. And if you are profitable, it could mean there's actually an issue, because it means you're not investing enough in growth. Right. So I think that that's a great topic for a board meeting, by the way, and it's something the board should get aligned on. I'm a fan of smart growth and seeing companies continue to really put the gas pedal on.
I always kind of think of these like 4 focal points that the board should be aligned on, and the leadership and the rest of the company. And one is the mission, which is big, broad, it's the North Star. But then it's the 3-year vision. Like, I think it's really important to try to target out at least 3 years, even if you're seed. Just where are we going? Because it's so important for investors, bringing people on, your clients, everybody involved, even the employees if they want to take that route, right? But to get something tangible and then bring that back to that 1-year plan. Like, what do we need to do by the end of the year? And then 90 days, what are we doing now, like, in order to get ourselves there? Having those aligned, you can kind of really have a path to where you're going. And of course, it's going to change. Things are going to change. But that helps the team and the investors kind of agree upon where we're going. And I think a lot of times that's lost, or there's financial plans that people see. I've been in a lot of companies when I first start with them, and there's a lot of different revenue targets. The investors have some that are different than the CFO and the head of sales, and they get lost. And I think you need to define what that is and work from that. And that's where plans should come from.
Yeah. And I had a company, or I saw a company once that put in their board deck, achieve 100 million in revenue, right? That's their goal. Well,
Right.
it's not a plan, right? That's
Right.
an aspirational endpoint.
Right.
But the stuff that has to go in the board deck is about 4 steps before that.
Right.
Which is, okay, what are the ingredients of success to build the kind of company that could hit that revenue target?
Right.
That's magical thinking, or that's kind of the kind of thing that's in your board deck.
Then you can reverse engineer that and then make it
Sure.
practical.
Right.
Or adjust it when it doesn't seem practical.
How do you think founders are doing in the current environment? You work with a lot of founders.
A lot of teams I work with are doing very well. But I think one of the biggest things that I see, and probably one of the biggest flaws right now that I see, is they've had to pull back a little bit, meaning they had to go and shrink their plans a little bit because they don't have as much capital as they planned. So they had to shrink their plans. But what they're doing wrong, they're in defense mode versus offense mode. And how I like to look at it is capital comes from LPs, it flows into venture firms. Those LPs are making bets on those venture firms. The venture firms are making bets on these founders and these companies, right? Once you get into the company, you're also making bets. And that's what capital efficiency is. So
Sure.
as a CEO, I have X amount of money and resources. Where do I want to put those bets that will turn $1 into $2 or $3? What they tend to do is decide to still do everything they planned on doing. They water down all their bets, and the inevitable happens. Things slow down. Versus looking at what we have and saying, where should we put our energy? And let's choose 3 to 5 things at a high level, and then let's drill into those things. Instead of dispersing the capital across too many bets within the organization, they need to solidify them within areas. So they're still on the offense, aggressively building product, or, upping their sales game, or whatever that might be. That's what I've seen recently happen.
No, that's right. And it's not making a bet. If you're choosing to invest in everything, you got to decide where you're going to really invest and put your capital.
All right. I have one question left for you.
Great.
And perfect timing. So this is probably the hardest question that I've given you, and you've aced all the other ones, so I'm excited.
Wow, I'm getting an A. I'm so excited.
So you're on a desert island. You're there the rest of your life. You have food and water, and it's comfortable. It's a tropical island, so it's beautiful. But you don't have a lot of entertainment. But you found a washed-ashore 80s boombox with unlimited batteries.
Oh, wow.
What one album are you going to bring with?
One album. It has to be from the 80s.
It doesn't have to be from the 80s.
Okay.
One album. That's the only album you're going to listen to the rest of your life.
Okay. Boy, I am debating between the White Album,
The Beatles' White Album.
the Beatles' White Album, Tattoo You by the Rolling Stones, and maybe for a desert island, some kind of softer vibe, like maybe James Taylor's Greatest Hits.
Ooh.
But yeah, I know, old school. I'm going old school.
All right, which one is it going to be?
I'm gonna have to go White Album. I'm a Beatles fan from way back.
That's awesome.
I used to own the entire Beatles collection on Apple Records, so that's I think the music that stands the test of time.
That's awesome. Great answer. One of my sons, we named him after John Lennon.
Oh,
His name's
wow.
Lennon. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's great.
But all 3 of those were really good answers. I think I could have lived with any of those if I had to choose.
It's the classics. They're classics for a reason.
Exactly. All right. Well, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
was
That's super fun.
It was almost like he was trying to block me, so I wouldn't go. Because I don't think he was moving. That was really weird.
That was really weird.
Anyways, well, we probably ended that abruptly.